Good afternoon and welcome to IAB There, our weekly live stream in which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. I'm Cheryl Goldstein, EVP Chief Industry Growth Officer at IAB. In today's session titled Understanding Invisible Disabilities in the Workplace, we'll be discussing the false perceptions, judgments, and lack of understanding for people with invisible disabilities. And while we hear a lot about DEI initiatives to make the workplace more diverse and inclusive, disabilities often get excluded from the inclusion discussion. So joining me today are three passionate experts on this topic. We have Jill Griffin, career strategist and executive coach, Laurel Rossi, chief marketing officer at Infillion and co-founder of Creative Spirit, and Sariana Nodell, board certified patient advocate, health administrator, disability life coach, and daughter extraordinaire. So welcome to the screen. Yes, I said daughter extraordinaire because in full transparency, Sariana is my daughter, but that is not why she's here today. This is not nepotism. Sariana happens to be someone very passionate about this subject. And what I thought we would do is have the three of you just brief intro, tell a little bit about the work you're doing in this space, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So Sarah, since I've already introduced you as my daughter extraordinaire, tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and a little about your background.
Great, thank you for that extraordinary introduction. I am a disabled professional consultant and I am also a professional patient advocate. The space that I like to take up in the disability world is that I'm here to assist individuals and companies not only in advocating for themselves, but in really being adaptive when it comes to providing resources and tools and education. So I've started the SPOONY Advocate Associates, and we're a group of disabled professionals assisting other disabled professionals live their best life.
Fantastic. And Laurel, we could go on forever about your fantastic background in the advertising industry. Tell us a little bit about that, but today I really want to focus on your work around Creative Spirit.
Thanks for having me, Cheryl. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Infillion, as Cheryl mentioned, and one of my passion areas is in the area of disability. I co-founded an organization called Creative Spirit in 2017 with two other members of the industry. And we find jobs for people with intellectual, developmental, and learning disabilities at the best companies in the world. These folks are unemployed at an astounding, wait for it, 85%.
Unbelievable. And Jill Griffin, tell us a little bit, another, industry expert, longtime agency, media exec, who pivoted into life coaching. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I'm really glad to be here. That's something that's such a important topic to me. I have an invisible disability and it's something I hid for a while. So my work today is helping people really with whatever they're dealing with, what is a story of resilience and perseverance, whatever they're dealing with, how they can show up in the workplace and still do an excellent job and really get the tools that they need and be able to advocate for themselves. And as you said, I've been on all sides of the table, both the publishing side and the media side. So I know a lot about what everybody is going through on a day-to-day basis. And today, yes, I'm an executive coach working with both individuals and teams.
Fantastic. So we have a great group here. And Jill, let's start with you because it was your story. You posted this story on LinkedIn, and I've known you for a long time and did not know that you had an invisible disability. And then I read the story and said, wow, I wonder how many other people have similar stories and are hiding this disability. And of course, having Sariana, who has had a lifetime of all sorts of invisible disabilities and had to advocate both in school and in the workplace. So this is a topic we definitely need to bring front and center. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your story and the thing that you posted on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So back in January, I wrote an article, a first person experience for Huffington Post, and that was what I was sharing on LinkedIn. And I am a traumatic brain injury survivor. And the way brain injuries often show up is that they are slow and insidious. So there was the initial impact. And then, of course, there was the months and ultimately years after. I think what's unique, especially in my situation and others that experience a non-apparent or invisible disability, is that I didn't have a proper diagnosis. I had a series of symptoms that weren't able to be easily laddered up into any one thing. So therefore, without a diagnosis, it was unclear for me how to disclose and what to talk about. I ultimately ended up hiding my disability for 6 years until it just got to the point where I was so exhausted. Exhausted because I didn't want you to find out, because I didn't want you to judge me or take away my opportunity or make decisions on my behalf. I also knew that at times, because it was invisible, it worked to my advantage. Where again, I did not have to disclose or show, be the subject of any sort of stereotyping or stigmatism. But again, by not disclosing, it also meant that on any given basis, on any given day, if there was something within the actual environment, there's about 20 different kinds of vestibular disorders, and if something in the environment was causing a constant disrupt, that would cause me to have a vestibular attack. Anything from movement to flickering lights. I mean, I worked in media, for gosh sakes. I mean, there was a lot of flickering lights, a lot of video impact. Any of that could put me into a vestibular attack and a vestibular episode, which meant that I could lose control of my motor skills, speech, being slurry. And, just in this process, having colleagues share with me that at times they thought I was drinking or that I was drunk or under substances, which obviously has a reputational risk, which was not true because of me not disclosing. And, disclosing is a very personal choice. But what I also noticed in this process is there was only one time to disclose, and that was at the job interviewing process. There was no other container or system in place that, well, what if someone had a disability once they were working there? How would they come out? So what I ultimately ended up doing was disclosing to allies, to bosses, and people who could help me along the way. But I chose to never formally disclose through the formal HR means, because again, there wasn't a place to have that conversation. So yeah, I'm just helping shed light on a regular basis. So many people are going through something, whether it's an emotional, intellectual, or a physical disability, and where we can create understanding, compassion, and then advocacy, and having them have tools that they can tap into is really what the change I want to see happening within our workplaces.
And Sariana, this sounds like it's the kind of work that you do. Like Jill's story's probably not that unusual in your world. You probably hear this sort of thing all the time. How do you advise patients or patients people that have these kind of disabilities? How do you advise them to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, this conversation is not new, but each individual's experience with it is really valuable. I think a big part of the advocacy and what I like to recognize in everyone I'm talking to is that as far as you've come, you've been doing the advocacy. So adding the tools to their tool belt to make that advocacy a little bit more efficient is how I like to reframe it, because I think it's really important to build up the strength of these individuals who have been holding on to all these pieces, right? You're trying to hold on to, is the light flashing? You're trying to hold on to, is the screen too dark? Is there going to be a bathroom break? So starting with building up these individuals to realize how strong they really are and how much they've already done and how adaptable they are to being able to reframe the what they're doing to be able to help other individuals, assist them with what they've already done to accommodate for themselves. So I think that's the first part of what I really like to do, is just say, let's take what you've already done, because a lot of times, even with companies, it's not about changing the whole orchestra. It's just about fine tuning some of the items.
And Laurel, you work with companies to help them not only to place folks in jobs, but also to help, advise on how companies can be more accommodating. What are some of the tips that you give companies, and how can they help someone who has, say, some of the issues that Jill's talking about?
Yeah, so much to unpack here. I am moved by both of the previous conversations, because when you look at it from the person's perspective, the candidate's perspective in our case, you realize there is so much going on and there's so much support that needs to be given. When you talk about the employers, one of the things, we did a study at the end of 2020 and realized that only 12% of companies are actually focused on this area. And it's not just intellectual disability, it's also physical disability. It is just not risen to the top of the ladder in terms of hiring priorities. And that's nobody's fault and everybody's fault at the same time, let's say. And what we're trying to do is really make disability hiring the new normal, right? It is a new normal in this space. What we've learned is that there are usually three obstacles. One is people don't believe there's a pipeline. Number two, they don't really acknowledge the employees in their own populations. And so a lot of the work that needs to get done is inside companies to begin with. And the third thing is there's usually a perception that candidates or employees are not as capable as others. And so there's this enormous training opportunity out there. And so over the past year, what we've done is we've really put together a deep, deep training bench to be able to support companies in giving them a way to approach what their hiring practices should be, could be, and to put all those accommodations in place that an employee is technically and federally entitled to. And while that all sounds very technical and not human, at the end of the day, the best part of what we've put in place is to give every single candidate a coach that stays with them for life, that also works with the hiring managers. And those coaches have made our clients 100% successful. And I say that somewhat boastfully, in that as we move to a way to employ people at scale, I'm proud to say that since 2017, 100% of our candidates are still in their jobs.
That is incredible, awesome work. And it seems to me that given, I've had a lot of conversations around the Great Resignation and the talent crunch, and I've been on so many Zoom calls where I'm hearing everyone complaining, I can't find talent, I can't retain my talent, we're outbidding each other for talent. You would think that this is an area where there could be a rich, pipeline, as you were saying, for various jobs. How do we get companies to start thinking differently and to start looking at this area? And are there certain types of jobs that, remote work, for example, might make a lot of sense for people that have physical challenges? What are some other things that companies should be thinking about?
If I can jump on that,
Ariana.
Going off of what Laurel was saying, that's incredible. Those numbers are unheard of. And I think something that I know, actually, that's something that companies can do in that new normal shift is taking the understanding of disability and shaping how they talk about it and the language that they're using in the application process. So instead of it being the burden of proof on the individual, being instead of being tolerant, being welcoming, right? So taking us from, oh, we can have disability kids in the classroom and I guess they can work with us, to, yes, we want these awesome individuals to join our team and be an equal part of our team. So using disability individuals' preferred language, so person first language in the hiring documentation, and bringing it up and having certain steps in place, right? So like Jill was saying, not just in the interview process, but discussing how in the future, here's where the supports are. Right. So we're going to have yearly check-ins and bi-monthly, quarterly, whatever, but how you introduce that space of holding is really important to individuals who may need to feel like there's something else that's going to come up in the future, even if it isn't right now. This can be true for the disabled individual. This can be true for someone who might have something come up in the future, or for caregivers. I think the other part of this space that's so valuable is also bringing in the discussion about caregivers and caretakers when we think about the hiring, because so many individuals are busy having to have an adjustable schedule because they're taking care of a loved one, that if that's an option to bring into the workplace and say, hey, I need every other Friday off because I'm taking care of someone, and you know that it's a safe place you can bring it to, that changes who's going to apply.
I think that's really an excellent point, because how often do you see, job posting that says people with special requirements or needs or welcome, like even something as simple as that, you don't see it. I know even in our applications, it just says, do you have a disability? Yes, no, prefer not to answer. And, Jill, Laurel, how likely is it that people are going to check that and say, oh yeah, I do, and gladly give that information?
I mean, I personally didn't check it because to me, it was like the big red rejection button if I had chose to disclose. But I think, again, the challenge with non-apparent disabilities is we want to be understood, yet we have to feel safe to come forward and explain. So walking that line to me is both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach, right? We need the individual with the disability to know that they have rights. And as Sariana was saying, like advocacy and coming forward and understanding their rights. We also need our peer set and our colleagues to know that like it's okay, and giving them language, and just like other trainings around DE&I work that we've had to so needed, and we've had to bring back into a much higher level into organizations so that people have awareness, making sure that disability is part of it. And then it also has to be a top-down approach where leadership needs to understand that there may be nuances needed to be made for certain individuals so that they have space, and we create space for them so that it's at all levels. And the burden isn't just on the person with the disability to have to carry the burden. And again, it is a very similar conversation that we've all been having around racism too, where it cannot be the burden of the one individual to educate all. We all have to carry our own backpack. We all have to be responsible for educating ourselves and making sure at all levels that we know and we understand.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to just maybe get back to the disclosure conversation a tiny bit, because it is sort of the underpinning of a lot of things that happen. I mean, one of the reasons we started Creative Spirit was that we took the burden of disclosure off the table, right? So if you're a company that subscribes, you are not now in a position where you're worrying about HIPAA, you're worrying about all those other things. You have disclosed individuals. And evidence that we didn't have several years ago that this could work is that we recently have been aggressively posting positions, and we used to get an average of, 3 to 5 applications per job, and we are up to 600, 800, 900 applicants per job. And so what that tells me is that people are getting more willing to disclose. They're starting to understand not just their rights a little bit better, but they're starting to understand that the atmosphere is softening and moving in that direction. And I think the most important things for companies to understand is that even if you don't have all the buttons and gadgets in place to be accommodating, if you will, all the tools, there are tools out there, which is a lot of what we're talking about today, and a lot of what my colleagues here are talking about. Those training sessions and abilities are things that need to get baked into every organization. And we're trying to take the complication out of it, right? We recently put a training program in for that purpose a couple months ago. And of course, companies have now started making those job postings part of their entire process. So it's not, here's one special job for you to post. Here's my entire API that I'm going to push over to you, Creative Spirit, and we're going to make everybody eligible and give them accommodations for those jobs. So things are starting to happen.
It's amazing.
Incredible. Something like what, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Anna.
I was just going to say, dovetailing off of exactly that, something that it's incredible to see, and you're starting to see it, but it's still very rare, is in these applications or in these postings, seeing, this would be great for an individual who needs to work from home, an individual who needs a strange schedule, this would be or odd schedule, this would be fantastic position for someone who prefers to work with a screen reader or doesn't like to work person facing, right? Like you can start to, instead of identifying a specific disability, individual disability, starting to use those, cast a wide net by welcoming individuals who might be searching for those terms of what kind of job is going to be best for them. And then actually saying, we know that we want to hire these individuals who might have these preferences instead of restrictions, these preferences. All of a sudden that net is so wide, and you're not saying you need to disclose, but you're saying, hey, this might be a great option for you and we want you. It's a shift in the culture that doesn't require a financial shift, but it's just a way to think about who you're inviting into your own work culture.
So speaking of like terms and language, one of the issues with recruiting, of course, is that so much of it starts with machines matching resumes to jobs, looking for very specific keywords. How does that play in this space? Does that end up being like, for some reason, these resumes never even make it to those jobs for certain reason? Or like, what should someone be mindful of when they're filling out applications online that maybe a human isn't vetting? Any tips for that?
This is such a rich topic, and I want to make sure my colleagues have a chance to answer as well. But I want to say that we've spent the majority of the past 4 years studying this topic and ended up building our own algorithms that go into the job matching process. And a lot of those scores have nothing to do with the typical keywords that go into the process, but actually behavioral characteristics that an individual is willing to talk about. Mobility, whether or not you can tolerate X amount of stress, et cetera. And all of those things in the positive are great things for both the employer and the individual to acknowledge going in. And so today we can also match people not only temperamentally with the jobs that are good for them, but also the things that are going to ensure their retention over the long run. So that's what we've been working on for 4 years. It is not an easy subject, Cheryl. Thank you for asking the question.
Jill, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I see it from the various clients I work with that can't get past the ATS. So the fact that there is a solution out there that while you're creating it for Creative Spirit, that hopefully others will be doing that too, because we know that the ATS, while it may help with time management, it has excluded an extraordinary amount of people that should actually be included. So that I just love hearing.
So Laurel, how do companies work with Creative Spirit? It's a membership, or they pay a fee and they have access to a database of potential candidates? What are the services you provide? I think this is something companies might want to, from this conversation, hopefully you're going to start getting a lot of phone calls and interest. So how does someone get connected to Creative Spirit?
Yeah, so we've made the connection. It really started at the top. Still to this day, a CEO will say, hey, we should be doing this. And of course, they port it over to the HR teams. And then the HR teams, in some cases, are saying, yikes, what do I do? And so we've been lucky enough to work with, we work in a fabulous industry, right? You've got hard jobs, soft jobs, and you've got CHROs, DEI managers, CEOs who are really embracing this topic. And you would come to Creative Spirit if you're interested, and we don't charge a thing. You make a donation. You can become a member company. You can sign on for our training sessions, which are quite expansive, and will train your entire cohort or cohorts over the course of the year that you have to pay for, because we can afford to provide that for free. But all the coaching is for free, and the employer services, where we are able to include your API in our matching system, is also not for charge. Every one of our companies has made a donation, of course, and we've had the best of the best, from the Voyas to the Verizons to the MRMs, and on and on and on and on.
That's fantastic. And Jill, how do you work with some companies to help them gear up? Like, as we mentioned already, that HR departments, for example, are not equipped to handle these conversations or to handle, implementing some kind of a program. Recruiting departments certainly aren't, understanding what they need to be doing for the most part. I mean, that's what I've seen, is that this is, like I said, excluded from the inclusion conversation more often than not. Do you work with HR teams or senior leadership to help them, embrace this into their culture?
I work more with senior leadership in creating strengths-based cultures, so that really looking at the strengths and talents of the various individuals, and then helping within team dynamics that we're setting up the team for success, which we've seen increase productivity, profitability, morale, retention of employees, because everybody is happier and working in a high dynamic team, which is what most people want to be doing. So working with them that way has been really, just seeing that growth has been really amazing. And then the other way is just putting it on the table and making sure that we are talking about, don't assume everybody is able-bodied. the idea of ableism and making sure that that is top of mind when we're having these conversations, supporting, employee resource groups. And again, there's the expression, not about me without me, making sure that you have a fair representation. I have an invisible or non-apparent disability. I do not speak for all people who have disabilities. There's so many nuances and so many needs. So making sure that you have a wide variety of people within those ERGs is other ways that I talk with both HR and senior leadership to make sure that you have a fair representation within your departments to have a successful and profitable company.
And I know you talk about bursting through the BS or the belief.
Yes.
I love that. How do you help evangelize that across an organization? So it's one thing for HR and maybe leadership to know, they're aware that, oh, person so-and-so we just hired is visually impaired or is hearing impaired or has sensitivities to certain things. How do you evangelize that across the organization so that everyone is aware without it being, oh, that person, kind of like pointing in secret that, oh, that person has whatever. How do you, bring that out into an organization in a way that's welcoming, consistent, and embracing, so that it's not, it doesn't become a big thing or that person's not embarrassed, but people are aware. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, first we want to make sure that, I love that you said that it's welcoming, right? We are all learning the new language. We're learning that, whether it's gender identity, ableism, racism, that we are learning, and we're all trying to do better so that we're all responsible for our own learning, but we can also extend kindness and birth to other people that may be using terminology, and we don't want people to feel afraid or intimidated. We want people to be talking about it, because if we don't talk about it, awareness precedes change. And if we're not talking about it, we're never going to change it. So that is, the biggest thing is making sure that there's that spirit of, we're going to do our best, but we're probably going to mess up, or we're not always going to have the right answer. And we need to be accountable for our mess ups, but we also need to give grace there. The second thing is really doing bias training. And that I have found to be most effective at the individual level, to be working with individual leaders and helping them understand that they have inherent bias. There's also plenty of books that I recommend that people are reading within this space. One of them is Demystifying the Disability, which is by, I'm totally spacing on her last name right now, excuse me, but it's Demystifying Disability. We can always put that in the show notes, which is an excellent book. Emily Lado, that's who it's by. And making sure that everybody has a copy of that and that they're reading it and they're understanding. But the inherent bias training is really, really the most effective thing that I've seen. And then again, that spirit of welcoming, that this is a new, we're not here to shame anyone or scold anyone. We just want people to understand so that there is a more inclusive environment.
Sarah, Yana, go ahead.
Yeah. Additionally, I think part of that culture shift is having everyone's, I like to say that accessibility benefits everyone. So by having a closet full of, oh, hey, we have screen covers, and if you need different headphones, like having options is one of the best ways to accommodate a wide berth of individuals. So instead of saying, oh, that person needs something special, everybody all of a sudden can have access to something that might give their screen a little bit less like a blue light filter, or everyone might benefit from having 2 or 3 chair options, or if you would like a standing desk versus a seated, right? So having things like those yearly skip meetings where you're checking in with someone who's specifically asking, is there anything we can do to make your work experience better? And then the individual being able to have options, right? Having a list of things that people have been provided with. So saying, look, you can check out our closet, or would you like to change your break schedule? Is there anything at that point that everyone might benefit from? And then those individuals who have more specified needs don't have to feel like they have to out themselves. And then at that point, when they need something more, they might feel comfortable saying, hey, this is a great option and I would do better with blank.
Yeah. And I think also, just to pile on that, is making sure that all of your collateral, your employee handbook, your website, anything that you're putting out there also follows through with the spirit of inclusion, and that, you are not just working with able-bodied individuals, and making sure that it's across all levels, because otherwise it just becomes, something that you can claim as marketing and it's not actually lived in the culture. And employees, able-bodied or not, are going to be able to sniff that out and not necessarily want to be in a culture that is disingenuous.
I would just say as pervasive as disability is, I think that 20% of the population, if you think about it, very few people have had workplace experience, hands-on workplace experience with a peer or otherwise. You may even have it at home and you choose to be quiet about it, if you will. And I think that this whole idea of making disability inclusion and equity the new normal at work, or a new normal, because there are lots of things that need to be normalized. But this being one of them is a super important concept for us. We want people to be able to disclose. People with visible disabilities don't get the choice, right? They have to disclose. And so when you think about it, it's the most equanimous thing that we can do to make sure that we're including everybody.
And Sariana, would you advise, when do you think someone should reveal? Like, that came up that during the interview process is usually the only opportunity. Does it make sense to say something at that point, or do you advise people to hold off and wait until they're about to start work?
I advise people to do what they feel is necessary for them to be able to accomplish the task at hand. I personally, it is not in my place to tell someone what they should or shouldn't say. That is their health and their personhood. What I do like to suggest is remind people that you are never obligated to disclose your disability, whether that be one-on-one or to a company. But if for individuals who know what they need, certainly once you've gotten the job and before your first day, if there's an accommodation that you can put into HR, that is generally the best time to do that. But at no point are you obligated to disclose, and at no point, if something changes, are you obligated to say, oh, now I have to disclose. For example, like I live with 6 chronic and rare diseases, and a lot of times I get hired when I'm in a really good health place, and then I'll have a flare up. And at that point, fortunately, I've usually said, look, I may need to use my time off within my first 90 days for a health appointment. If this comes up, I like to be proactive and say, this is something that might happen. That first 90 days is a very hard thing to reach for myself personally, and for individuals with chronic illnesses or who have a lot of doctor's appointments. So that way, I'm not necessarily disclosing what exactly it is, but I'm saying there's something that might come up. So there are different ways that you can disclose and different levels of disclosure. And I do generally advise people to find the level that they're comfortable with.
Excellent.
So add for the manager that's receiving the information, if someone says to you, and I personally have had this experience more than once, that, I'm going to be late on Tuesday because I have a doctor's appointment, don't assume I'm on a job interview. So don't start treating me differently that you think I'm actually interviewing. We might legitimately be having a doctor's appointment. I would also say the speed at which we address requests, again, not expecting perfection, but if my computer screen is having the moire effect and therefore I can't work, when we ask for new supplies, that to Sariana's point, there's a supply closet and there's a couple of extra monitors around that it can be addressed quickly, because it literally is the difference between not only me working and therefore being productive for you, but me actually then having to go out on, having absenteeism and being out on because I have a healthcare issue now because we triggered an episode. So the speed in which you address the concerns, I think, is also something that you want to work into your process and timelines.
Awesome. Laurel, last word. We're just about out of time.
Just a couple of things. It's been 31 years since ADA, passing of ADA. Every single remedy, if you will, in ADA was pointed toward the private sector, pretty much, and assuming that disability employment was going to happen. It obviously didn't happen. And if you think about it, everybody was given 30 years to put some of the structural things in place. And so you'll notice more elevators and curb cuts and things like that. And that is fantastic. But in some ways, time has run out, right? All those things have been done. Where's the focus on the private sector and employment? It's up to us. I implore everybody to jump on the bandwagon, and I'm certainly here to help.
Fantastic.
So
Well,
good.
thank you all, Jill, Laurel, and Sariana, for all the hard work that you do, first and foremost, and for sharing your stories and your expertise with us today. I know our audience got a lot out of this. I think this is a fantastic area for companies to start exploring. I love the idea of just make things accessible for everyone, have a closet with all kinds of stuff, have a request forms, and it's easy for people to make those requests. I love all the tips that you shared today. Easy to start adding employees through Creative Spirit. You've got great advisors in Sariana and Jill. Use them, folks. Okay, let's see if we can make it a better, more inclusive workplace for all. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. I'm Cheryl Goldstein, and this is IAB There.
Thank you, Cheryl.